This video is sponsored by World of Warships. In early 1950, USS Missouri, America's only battleship at the time, found herself high and dry on a sandbank outside Norfolk Naval Base. It took the combined efforts of the Army and Navy over 2 weeks to set her free, using an ingenious combination of tugs, anchors, and engineering expertise. But what really happened? How did the country's only battleship get herself into such a predicament? USS Missouri is an Iowa-class battleship with a length of 270 metres and a displacement just under 60,000 tonnes. Completed in 1944, she participated in the latter stages of the Second World War, even hosting the signing of the Japanese Instrument of Surrender in late 1945. After the war, she remained in active service, surviving the mothballing that occurred to most battleships as aircraft carriers quickly rendered them obsolete. Of course, battleships, and the USS Missouri in particular, are by no means obsolete when it comes to this video's sponsor, World of Warships. World of Warships is a free-to-play game available for PC. I say game, but you might even describe it as a bit of a floating digital museum, displaying breathtaking recreations of not only the most fearsome vessels of the First and Second World Wars, but also many blueprints and designs of ships that never saw battle. New content is released every month, whether it's new ships, in-game nations, cosmetics, or even ship classes. You can always count on enjoying fresh gameplay experiences in World of Warships' stunning 12x12 arenas. There are more than 40 unique maps with dynamic weather, all of which have been updated with stunning new water effects and textures, making the game's seas virtually indistinguishable from the real deal. Conquer the oceans with any one of the multiple ship classes on offer, big-hitting battleships like the USS Missouri, quick and devastating destroyers, all-round cruisers, sneaky submarines, and if the skies are your thing, aircraft carriers. Oh, and did I mention that it's also available on console? Jump aboard yourself and download World of Warships using the first link in the description. During registration, use the code WARSHIPS to get exclusive rewards including a bunch of doubloons, credits, premium account time, and a free ship after you complete 15 battles. Anyway, towards the end of the 1940s, USS Missouri found that she was the only US battleship left in commission and was sent for a 3-month overhaul in Norfolk Naval Shipyard. While there, her new master, Captain William D. Brown, took command. He was a distinguished officer, seemingly destined for the top, but needing some big ship experience to help him on his way. Unfortunately, his command style was more of a disciplinarian rather than promoting an open atmosphere. On his first run on Missouri, his executive officer had offered some input into a navigational question, but was later reprimanded by Brown, making clear that he wanted his crew to know their place. Anyway, with the trial run out of the way, Missouri's following deployment was to Cuba for exercises. She departed Pier 7 at Norfolk Navy Yard and headed out through Hampton Roads towards Chesapeake Bay and the open ocean. She passed between Fort Wool and Old Point Comfort without incident and then prepared to run the acoustic range on her way into the bay. Essentially, the Navy had a series of underwater cables that they were using to map the acoustic signature of different vessels, so they asked passing ships if they'd be happy to take part. They'd asked Missouri if she could run the range on her way out, so Captain Brown passed it on to his operations officer to make it happen. He, in turn, passed it on to another officer who couldn't make much sense of it as the charted information was unclear. The chart showed 5 buoys marking the range, but 3 of the buoys were removed in the days prior, so no one really knew what to expect. The thing is, apart from the captain and the 2 officers in question, no one else knew that Missouri was going to be running the range, so it came as a complete surprise when Captain Brown asked the other officers on the bridge to look out for the acoustic buoys. Needless to say, given the captain's personality, they were ordered off the bridge to go and get themselves informed. Back on the bridge, another officer believed he'd spotted the acoustic buoys, so he reported to Captain Brown and Missouri headed straight towards them. Unfortunately, the markers in question were actually spar buoys on a small channel used by fishing vessels with nowhere near enough water for a fully laden battleship. As Missouri continued on her track, more and more of the crew started to realise something was wrong. Some of them alerted the captain but were ignored, while others, like the radar operators, assumed their equipment must be malfunctioning. It was only when visual reports from the aft watchman came in saying the propellers were churning up mud that the captain finally realised something was very wrong. Within seconds, Missouri was riding up onto the sandbank, her momentum carrying her hundreds of metres onto the shoal. By the time he ordered full astern on the engines, it was too late. The engineers had already shut down the propulsion due to sand ingress into the water cooling system. Missouri was hard aground, within sight of some of the Navy's most senior officers' accommodation in Naval Station Norfolk, as well as their Army equivalents stationed at Fort Monroe. On the plus side though, it also meant that she was close to a lot of resources that could be brought into play over the coming weeks in an attempt to set her free. The problem was that she had run aground on one of the highest tides of the normal cycle, meaning there would be another 2 weeks before it would get back to that same height again. Not only that, but her immense size and speed meant that she carried so much momentum that she drove herself high up onto the sand, dropping her waterline so much that she had effectively lost over 10,000 tons of buoyancy. They immediately knew that no tug would ever be able to pull her free, so the only option was a combination of lightering and increasing buoyancy. Essentially, they called in a tanker to offload as much fuel and water as possible, as well as barges to take off things like ammunition, stores and personnel. To increase her buoyancy, they called in army support to dredge around the ship and let her sit lower in the water. They also attached pontoons under the hull, increasing her underwater displacement. Almost 2 weeks later, on the 31st of January, they were ready to attempt to break her free. As Missouri's engines were inoperable, the required power was supplied by 13 of the Navy's largest tugs, complemented by 9 sets of beaching gear. Beaching gear is essentially just a giant anchor attached to a powerful winch back on board Missouri, each set capable of applying even more force than the largest tugs, but pretty useless once the ship starts moving. Anyway, the tugs were arranged with all the biggest ones to provide as much pulling force as possible, with some of the smaller ones at the bow to push from side to side, twisting the ship, but it didn't work. Although all the calculations said that it should, Missouri just didn't move. They realised there must be something else holding her in position. With the benefit of hindsight, we actually know that she'd impaled herself on an old anchor, easily explaining why this first attempt didn't work. Anyway, with the tidal window closing, they offloaded even more weight and rearranged the tugs for one final push. This time, 3 of the large tugs were moved to assist with the twisting, with the rest continuing to work with the ground anchors to provide that astern power. The twisting tugs powered up, pulling the bow to starboard while the winches heaved on the port anchors. Slowly, Missouri's massive bow turned to starboard. It was working. They then repositioned the twisting tugs on the port bow and heaved on the starboard anchors, turning her to port much quicker than that initial turn to starboard. She was finally free. With the tug's assistance, Missouri was manoeuvred back to Norfolk and into dry dock for repairs, while the investigation continued to try and work out how such a simple mistake could happen. In the end, the inquiry found that it all boiled down to one thing: human error. It was the captain's error in navigation, but that error should have been picked up by the team. Unfortunately, the atmosphere on board was such that the crew were afraid to speak up, and when they did, their concerns were ignored. Even now, over 70 years later, we still encounter this same issue at sea. The master is in command, but a major part of that is establishing the correct atmosphere on board so that the entire team can function effectively together. Again, a massive thanks to this video's sponsor, World of Warships. Download now using the first link in the description, and remember to use the code WARSHIPS to get a bunch of exclusive rewards.